May 1942. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. A desperate search for a man-portable anti-tank weapon was about to culminate in a last-ditch, improvised demonstration that would forever change infantry combat. The problem was simple and deadly. The standard American rifle grenade was too weak, and existing anti-tank guns were too heavy and slow to deploy. The solution rested on the M10-shaped charge, a 3.5-pound, 6 kilograms warhead that could punch through over 3 inches, 76 millimeters, of steel plate, but was far too heavy to be fired from a standard rifle. Within 24 months, over 400,000 of the new weapon systems born this day would be in the hands of Allied soldiers. This revolution in battlefield power came not from a sophisticated artillery piece, but from a simple shoulder-fired tube derisively nicknamed the Bazooka. The project was officially designated Launcher Rocket AT-M1. Its architects were Captain Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Ewell of the U.S. Army Ordnance Department. Tasked with creating a delivery system for the potent M10 warhead, they had struggled. During one frustrating test, Ewell, a recent engineering graduate, stumbled upon a pile of scrap metal containing a 60mm mortar practice tube. In a moment of pure battlefield ingenuity, he suggested, "Why don't we try putting the rocket in that tube?" The team quickly fashioned a rudimentary launcher from the scrap tube, wiring the rocket's ignition to a battery and a trigger mechanism scavenged from a Colt pistol. During a high-level ordnance demonstration for senior military officials, their makeshift weapon was an afterthought, added to the schedule at the last minute. As other, more complex anti-tank weapons failed to impress, Skinner and Ewell were given the nod. Ewell hoisted the 54-inch steel tube to his shoulder, aimed at a moving tank target over 300 yards away, and fired. The 36-inch M9 rocket hissed from the tube at 265 feet per second, 80 mph, and slammed into the tank, producing a flash of brilliant light. Stunned, Major General Gladian M. Barnes, Chief of Ordnance Research, turned and remarked, "I have no doubt that we have the answer." An immediate on-the-spot order for 5,000 units was placed. The weapon's distinct resemblance to comedian Bob Burns's popular homemade musical instrument, a bazooka, gave it a name that stuck far better than its official designation. The urgency of the war effort demanded unprecedented speed. According to Ordnance Department procurement records, June 1942, the contract for the first mass-produced M1 launchers was awarded to General Electric, not for their electronics expertise, but for their simple metalworking capacity. The initial production cost was a mere $19.54 per launcher, about $365 in 2025 dollars. A stunningly low figure for a weapon capable of destroying a Panzer I-4 tank valued at over 100,000 Reichsmarks. The M9 rocket ammunition was even cheaper to mass produce. This economic disparity was a core part of its strategic value. The Allies could field thousands of tank-killing systems for the cost of a single enemy armored vehicle. The entire system, launcher and rocket, was designed for rapid, low-skill manufacturing, a critical advantage in a war of industrial attrition. The bazooka's first taste of combat came during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa in November 1942. Rushed from the factory floor to the front lines with minimal training and hastily written field manuals, its initial performance was mixed. Troops were unfamiliar with the weapon's backblast, a jet of hot gas exiting the rear of the tube that could injure or kill anyone standing behind the operator. The early M1 model's battery-powered ignition system proved unreliable in the dust of Tunisia and later in the bitter cold of the European winter. But when it worked, it was a revelation. For the first time, a two-man infantry team could actively hunt and destroy enemy armor. The psychological impact was immense, transforming the foot soldier from prey into predator. This new capability, however, was about to fall into enemy hands. During the chaotic fighting around the Kasserine Pass in early 1943, Wehrmacht troops overran American positions and captured several M1 bazookas and their M9 rockets. These were not merely battlefield trophies. They were technological treasures that were immediately crated and shipped to German weapons laboratories, setting the stage for a deadly race in rocket-propelled anti-tank weaponry. The American 2.36-inch, 60mm M1 bazooka was a war-winning innovation, but its design secrets would not remain exclusive for long. Following its capture in Tunisia, German engineers at the Hassag Arms Company in Leipzig immediately began reverse engineering the weapon. They admired the simplicity of its shoulder-fired rocket propulsion, but deemed its warhead insufficient. The result, appearing on the Eastern Front in late 1943, was the fearsome Raketenpanzerbüchse 54, a weapon so intimidating its nickname became its official designation, the Panzerschreck, or Tank Terror. While the American launcher cost the U.S. government under $20 to produce, the more substantial German copy cost approximately 70 Reichsmarks, a worthy investment for a weapon that could kill a 30-ton Sherman tank. By the time of the Normandy landings, over 200,000 Panzerschrecks would be in the hands of the Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS, creating a deadly symmetry on the battlefields of Europe. This rapid and effective counter-development forced a frantic evolution in both technology and tactics for American forces. The Panzerschreck was, in essence, an upscaled and improved bazooka. It fired a massive 88mm 7.2-pound, 3.3 kilos rocket, capable of penetrating over 4.3 inches, 110 millimeters of armor, significantly more than the American M1's 3-inch capability. This was more than enough to defeat the frontal armor of a Sherman M4A1 tank. The weapon was heavier at 24.5 pounds, 11 kg, and its rocket's backblast and smoke were so severe that early models required the gunner to wear a protective poncho and gas mask. This was soon rectified with the addition of a large blast shield, giving the Panzerschreck its iconic silhouette. Its appearance signaled a new threat. German infantry, once reliant on clumsy anti-tank rifles or desperate measures like magnetic mines, now had a reusable long-range tank killer. Formidable two-man Panzerknacker, tank cracker teams became a priority target for Allied riflemen. Meanwhile, the American bazooka was showing its own deficiencies under the strain of continuous combat. The original M1's dry-cell battery ignition system was notoriously fickle. According to a U.S. Third Army after-action report, January 1945, bazooka misfire rates during the frigid Battle of the Bulge soared to over 50% in some units. One infantryman from the 101st Airborne noted, "You prayed every time you pulled the trigger in the snow. Half the time you got a click instead of a whoosh." Soldiers resorted to keeping the batteries in their armpits to stay warm, a desperate field expedient. The Ordnance Department, aware of the problem, had already begun issuing the improved M1A1 model in mid-1943, which replaced the troublesome batteries with a more reliable trigger-actuated magneto-ignition system. Still, thousands of the older M1 models remained in circulation, a constant source of anxiety for the GIs who depended on them. The bazooka versus Panzerschreck dynamic was a microcosm of the war's industrial philosophies. The American weapon was a testament to mass production, designed with an almost disposable simplicity that allowed factories like General Electric and Cheney Bigelow Wire Works to produce over 476,000 launchers of all models by 1945. The focus was on good enough numbers. The German approach, while also embracing mass production for the Panzerschreck, reflected a tendency toward over-engineering for superior performance. They accepted a heavier, more expensive weapon to gain a decisive edge in armor penetration, a philosophy born of a shrinking resource base where every shot had to count for more. The presence of the Panzerschreck had a chilling effect on Allied tanker morale. The once confident Sherman crews now scanned every hedgerow and shattered building for the telltale blast shield. In response, tankers began welding scrap metal and sandbag racks to their tanks, a field modification known as jury rig armor, in a desperate attempt to detonate the shaped charge warhead before it struck the primary hull. For American infantry, the arms race spurred the development of new tactics, emphasizing flank attacks and the use of multiple bazooka teams firing in volleys to guarantee a kill. The urgent need for more power and reliability led directly to the development of the M9 launcher and the vastly improved M6A3 rocket, which featured a redesigned fin assembly and a more potent shaped charge. This next generation of the American stovepipe was arriving in theater just in time for the climactic battles in France. June 1944. Normandy, France. The dense, claustrophobic hedgerows of the Norman bocage, ancient earthen walls thick with tangled roots and thorns, would become the definitive testing ground for infantry anti-tank warfare. In this brutal labyrinth, armored columns were channeled into narrow, muddy lanes, vulnerable to ambush from unseen enemies. Here, bazooka teams from divisions like the 1st and 29th Infantry would fire thousands of rockets, often at terrifyingly close ranges of less than 50 yards, 45 miles known. Victory in these lethal green tunnels would not be determined by the maximum range of the weapon, but by the cold nerve and refined tactics of the two-man teams who emerged from the shadows to hunt Germany's most powerful tanks. By the D-Day landings, the bazooka had matured. The flawed M1 model was largely replaced by the M9 and M9A1 system. This new launcher addressed the critical shortcomings of its predecessor. It featured the reliable magneto-firing system, improved iron sights, and most importantly, could be broken down into two 31-inch sections. This two-piece design, weighing just over 15 pounds, 8 kilo assembled, was a godsend for airborne troops of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, allowing the weapon to be easily carried during a parachute jump. It was paired with the new M6A3 rocket. This 3.4-pound projectile had a more aerodynamic fin design for better accuracy and a redesigned nose and shaped charge that boosted its penetration to a nominal 4 inches, 100 millimeters, making it a credible threat to the side armor of even the formidable Panther tank. It was in the hedgerow-to-hedgerow fighting that the bazooka transcended its role as a purely anti-tank weapon. GIs quickly adapted it into an all-purpose assault tool. When pinned down by a German MG-42 machine gun nest in a fortified farmhouse, a bazooka team could blast a mouse hole through the stone wall, creating an entry point for a follow-on grenadier and rifle team. Bunkers, pillboxes, and crew-served weapon emplacements were all systematically reduced by well-aimed 2.36-inch rockets. The U.S. Army had formalized its training, mandating a minimum of 30 hours for a certified operator, with an emphasis on target recognition and range estimation. Field manuals now detailed hunter-killer tactics, where 2 or more bazooka teams would coordinate to ambush a single tank, with one team acting as a diversion to expose the vehicle's vulnerable rear armor to the other. A soldier of the 2nd Infantry Division recalled, "You never saw the Panther until its cannon was poking through the leaves. Your job was to hit the engine compartment. You only got one shot before the whole world came down on you. The weapon's success created immense logistical demand. According to V Corps Ordnance Reports, July 1944, a single infantry division engaged in heavy fighting could expend over 500 bazooka rockets in a 24-hour period. Keeping the frontline teams supplied with this bulky ammunition was a constant challenge for the logistics officers of the Red Ball Express. The bazooka's utility was not lost on the Allies. While the British Commonwealth forces primarily used their own excellent PIAT, projector, infantry, anti-tank, they also received thousands of bazookas under Lend-Lease. Over 8,500 launchers and nearly 600,000 rockets were sent to the Soviet Union, where the Red Army, which favored massed anti-tank guns, found it a highly effective weapon for urban combat, as demonstrated in the final, grinding battles for Poznan and Berlin. The Germans, now deploying their Panzerschreck and single-use Panzerfaust in vast numbers, adapted their doctrine in direct response to the American hunter-killer teams. According to a 2nd Armored Division Combat Lessons Report, August 1944, German defensive tactics in Normandy were predicated on close integration of tanks and infantry. Panzer Grenadiers, armed with their own rocket launchers, would form a protective screen around their armor, specifically to ambush and destroy Allied bazooka teams. This created a deadly tactical cycle. American infantry hunted German tanks, while German infantry hunted the American infantry hunters. The bocage became a dueling ground for the world's first generation of shoulder-fired rocket infantry, a lethal new form of combat that was now standard practice on all fronts. As the Allies finally broke out of Normandy, they carried with them this hard-won expertise, ready for the final push toward the Rhine. December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Forest. The massive German counteroffensive Operation Wacht am Rhein was a final, desperate gamble. Over 200,000 troops and nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns, including the formidable Tiger II, smashed into a thinly held sector of the American front. The offensive was designed to achieve a stunning operational victory through shock and speed, but it would be blunted and ultimately broken by the dogged resistance of surrounded, outnumbered, and half-frozen American infantrymen. In the desperate defense of critical crossroads like Saint-Vith, Clairvaux, and Bastogne, a significant percentage of German armor kills were achieved not by heavy artillery or fighter bombers, but by two-man teams wielding the M9 and bazooka from shattered buildings and snow-filled foxholes. During the siege of Bastogne, the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division were surrounded and pounded by elite German panzer divisions. With their own armored support severely limited, the bazooka became their primary tank-killing weapon. According to a 101st Airborne Division after-action report analyzing the defense, bazooka teams were credited with at least 32 confirmed kills on German tanks and assault guns during the week-long siege. These teams would often allow panzers to roll past their positions, only to engage their thin top and rear armor from second-story windows or deep trenches at ranges of less than 30 yards. It was a terrifying close-quarters battle of attrition. For every German tank destroyed, several bazooka teams were often lost, yet their cumulative effect was decisive. They bled the German armored columns, slowed their advance to a crawl, and bought the priceless time needed for Allied reinforcements and clearing skies to turn the tide. In a now-famous press conference, General Dwight D. Eisenhower listed the weapons he considered the tools of victory that won the war in Europe. He cited the C-47 transport, the bulldozer, the Jeep, and the 2.5-ton truck, humble, logistical workhorses. He later added the bazooka to that list, acknowledging that this simple stovepipe had fundamentally empowered the common soldier. The bazooka, Eisenhower noted, was one of the four things that won the war for us. It had democratized anti-tank combat, giving infantry a fighting chance and forcing a radical shift in German armored doctrine, which now had to assume that every Allied infantry squad was a potential tank killer. The bazooka program stands as one of the most cost-effective military investments in history. By the end of the war, the United States had produced 406,628 launchers and 15,603,000 rockets, at an average cost of roughly $19 per launcher and $4.50 per rocket in 1944 dollars. The entire program cost was a fraction of the value of the enemy assets it destroyed. For the cost of a single Tiger Y tank, over 250,000 Reichsmarks, the Ordnance Department could produce over 3,000 M9 launchers. This profound economic asymmetry meant the American infantryman could trade a cheap, expendable rocket for a nearly irreplaceable piece of enemy armor and its veteran crew. This cost-per-kill advantage was a war-winning equation. The bazooka's legacy was immediate and profound. Its limitations against the heaviest late-war German armor, like the 70-ton Tiger II, spurred the development of a more powerful successor even before WW had ended. The result was the M20 Super Bazooka. Larger and more potent, it fired a 3.5-inch, 89mm rocket capable of penetrating up to 11 inches, 280mm of armor. Rushed into service at the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950, the M20 proved devastatingly effective. In the initial weeks of the invasion, American infantry equipped only with the obsolete 2.36-inch bazookas were unable to stop North Korea's Soviet-made T-34-85 tanks. The emergency airlift of M20 launchers to the front dramatically changed the situation, with the new weapon easily destroying the T-34s and helping to save the Pusan perimeter. From the scrap heaps of Aberdeen to the frozen forests of the Ardennes and the hills of Korea, the bazooka and its direct descendants cemented a permanent principle of modern warfare. The infantryman, properly equipped, could stand his ground and defeat the tank. From its flawed beginnings in North Africa, it became the terror of German tanks in the battles across Europe and ultimately shaped post-war military doctrine. The bazooka's legacy echoes to this day in the shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons carried by every modern soldier. It was not just one of the tools of victory that General Eisenhower honored. It was a revolution encapsulated in a steel tube, forever changing the confrontation between man and machine.